Welcome to the MacMillan Report. I'm Marilyn Wilkes, your host, and our guest is Dean Karlan, a professor of economics at Yale University and president and founder of Innovations for Poverty Action. IPA is a research and policy nonprofit that discovers and promotes effective solutions to global poverty problems. Since its founding in 2002, IPA has worked with over 400 leading academics to conduct more than 600 evaluations in 51 countries. This research has informed hundreds of successful programs that now impact millions of individuals worldwide. Today, we talk with Professor Karlan about a program he designed to raise ultra-poor households out of extreme poverty to a more stable state. Welcome, Professor Karlan.
Hi, great to be here.
Let's begin with an overview of the program that you developed. Tell us about it.
Sure. So one slight correction, just for the record, is I didn't design the program.
Okay.
One of the questions we get a lot in this space, and I say this both within academia, but also certainly when I'm talking with people outside of academia, is, so what's the answer? What's the cause of poverty, or what's the solution? And the reality is, there isn't one single solution. And the problem with poverty, what got us here in this first place, is a multitude of different factors. Now, that can be talked about at a grand level, at a country level. But what this program is doing is trying to take that way of thinking at a micro level, at the household level, and saying, what are the issues at the household that might keep a household in a trap so that they just can't escape that poverty trap, and it's a self-fulfilling trap. And so the program says, well, what if the problem is many things? And so the issue with other ideas that have been put forward in the past, like microcredit or a training program, or even just a simple cash transfer program, is that it's only hitting one thing at a time. It's just taking one issue, dealing with that. But when you have all these other issues, you don't get out of the trap. These other things still bind and they still hit, and they make it so you're not as effective with the one thing that is being done. So this program, which is called the graduation program, is its name that some people gave it, says, let's do 6 things. Let's do them all at once, and let's make a big push at the household level with this idea that if we do this, and we see this nice short-run blip up, do we see it in the long run? Does it sustain itself? Do we see people actually kind of out of this trap? So the 6 things that it does are, at the heart is a productive asset. By productive asset, I mean something that generates income.
Okay.
So it might be 4 goats. It might be beekeeping in Ethiopia. It was a cow in India. Usually it's an animal, but in some cases it's something that's not an animal. But it is an asset that is given to the household, not lent, usually around $200 to $300 of value. They also provide consumption support, some food, so that the immediate thing you don't do when you get those goats is slaughter one of them to eat it, and instead you rear them so that they can have kids and start generating income. Access to a savings account, training in whatever that asset is and how to rear it properly and have a sustainable income source. What we would call life coaching, which is a little bit nebulous and takes on different forms in the way it's implemented, but it basically consists of a weekly household visit from the nonprofit that is implementing the program, or it could be government that implements this as well, to work with the household both to identify issues they're having and make a plan. What are the steps you need to take to get from A to Z? And then a weekly visit to kind of work through those issues with the household. And access to a savings account, I think I did mention that one already. And then there's one more, a little bit of health intervention. It might be deworming pills, it might be some access to clean water. It's usually not enough where that alone is thought of as a linchpin of the program, but no doubt they're identifying some health issues and able to provide some service along the way. So it's all of these things at once is basically the program.
Okay, and what countries are you working in?
So when we started this program, it had already started a bit in Bangladesh before us. And we saw some early results there that looked very promising, which is part of what got us excited about this being something to test. One of the divides that we have, or the problems within academia, I would say, is that we don't have enough incentives to do replication. To see what are, let's not just do it one place and then think that we've answered some grand question for the world. Let's do it in many places, and let's try to start understanding something more concrete about the bounds within which something is going to work. So Ford Foundation and this group called CGAP, which is a donor consortium that's housed at the World Bank, approached us to say, here's this interesting program that we've been familiar with. What do you think of the idea of doing this in 6 places? And so that's basically what we did. It took a long time to get the 6 all together, but we did implement this in Honduras, Peru, Ghana, Ethiopia, India, and Pakistan.
Okay.
And so the evaluation that we were able to do, testing this basic idea and implementation across these 6 places, was able to move much faster into policy, because we do find, bottom line is the answer is very positive. We do find successful outcomes.
Okay.
And these outcomes persisted 3 years after the assets are transferred. There's a lot more to learn about how to make it better.
Right.
But the overall message was very powerful, and having the 6 made it part of what made that message powerful. Being able to go into policy conversations going, no. We're not just taking this one study from one place and claiming, like, voila,
It's going to
do
work
this everywhere.
Right.
We did it in 6, and that gave us a lot more confidence and grounding to
And there's
bring
6
this
very
policy.
different countries.
There's 6 very
Right.
different countries. There are some common aspects to all of them in terms of the way it was implemented. First of all, the program was designed to be very similar, although there are adaptations that are natural that have to, it's cows in India, but it's not cows in Honduras.
Right.
They all were done in rural areas, which is important. If one wants to think about this approach in an urban setting, probably a different set of issues need to be dealt with, and so it would look a bit different. The theory might be the same, of these kind of multiple constraints all interacting, needing to be a bit holistic about how you work on these issues at the household level.
Where, predominantly, where are these households who are the poorest? I mean, I had read a statistic, there are 1 billion people who are living on $1.25 a day. So are they predominantly in rural areas or in cities?
So you do have a lot of ultra poverty in cities, and it looks very different. These studies were all done in rural areas. And one of the things that these studies were doing in the very beginning is the intake process to identify, it wasn't the study doing this as much as the design of the program, is that the intake process to be eligible for the program, the first step was what's called a participatory wealth ranking, which is basically a community coming together and talking about the issues of poverty in their community and identifying which households are the poorest.
Wow, okay.
Right? And so a lot of other programs which have historically aimed or made arguments about reaching the poorest, like microcredit, have typically not actually reached the poorest. They've reached poor households, but there's actually a tranche below where they often will reach that are not helped by things like microcredit. And so this program is trying to reach to those. The only real filter that does weed out some of the poorest would be that if you're going to transfer beekeeping assets, which, hives and things like this, to help a household in rural Ethiopia get started with a beekeeping business, they have to have the physical capabilities to do that. And so realistically, if the members are too old or sick, there's other issues that need to be done from a humanitarian perspective. But it's not going to be helpful to hand them a livelihood that they're not actually physically going to be able to do. And so those people are often excluded from the program as it's been rolled out, and then other programs hopefully can help there.
Who do you have working with the families? Do you pick people who are already living in the countries to, train them and then evaluate them? How does that work?
So first of all, there's a clear separation, which is important as much as possible, between the implementing parties and the research. The research is managed by IPA for all of the field operations, and IPA has invested a lot historically in all the different countries we work to develop capacity in the country with local nationals who are able to manage the field work, manage the survey, and promote from within in that way. And that's important both for the quality of the work we're doing, the stability of the work we're doing, and also so that the work itself has that kind of impact on the education system and the capacity within country, because we see that some of our alumni who worked with us and are off doing other things in government, and we can see the impact from our work in that way, and it's exciting to see that. So that's on the research side. The ones that are actually working with the households, that's in each case is a different answer for who did that, and usually it was a local NGO was basically partnered with.
I see.
In Honduras and Peru, it was Plan International that then operated on the ground. In Ghana, We identified a local nonprofit called Presby Agric that we had worked with in the past, and had a really good set of field staff who were very, understand the issues of the households they're dealing with, and they've taken on many different projects that are a bit different. They're not just agricultural. And so they were a good partner. In Pakistan, it was actually 4 different nonprofits. In India, it was a nonprofit arm of a microcredit organization. Each one has a different story to it.
Right.
The one thing I would say that was important is when you have to think about what the path to scale is. So a lot of time you do the research because you're trying to test an idea, and you might learn something, and that's great, but then you have to say, okay, so now if we want to see this change the world in some way, there's a particular way of asking this question that I stole from Kevin Starr, who's head of the Malago Foundation, which I like, which is to say, who needs to do what differently? So you have to figure that out when you have any sort of evidence you think could actually be used.
Okay.
And when you want to start thinking about how do you take something to scale, ask that question of yourself. So in this case, when you ask that, you're looking at social protection in the government, because you're really dealing with something that is at scale and requires a lot of money.
Right.
So this is really a government. So even though these programs were tested by nonprofits, that was, we see it as proof of concept. And they were actually operated at decent scale. So these are not tiny little pilots that are small and cozy. These were actually fairly large programs. But it takes another leap to go from there to the entire country. And for that, you need government.
The government needs to be involved.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the government was involved in kind of observing the results as they came out and along the way. And there were annual conferences in which we were sharing early designs, early results, things of this nature.
So can you point to any countries who really embraced the work that was done and moved forward and created policy around the findings?
So the 2 that stand out so far, I think we're up to about 8 million households now that have been now part of this program after the results came out, that are now part of government scale up. Ethiopia and Pakistan in particular. There are states within India that are now expressing interest, and we're trying to start work there. But we've actually seen something in the order of 25 to 35 different conversations along the way. In the Philippines, we've been talking with them, doing something that's similar but not exactly this. And so one interesting question then for them to figure out is, okay, well, what you're doing is similar, it's not this. Here's what's been tested elsewhere. Maybe what you're doing actually would work better, but this is where, setting up a test would really help them learn.
Right.
And so that's the conversation in the Philippines. I'm heading in 2 weeks to Guyana, and the government of Guyana saw the results and reached out to us and said, how can we learn from this to set our policy? So, we're seeing it in big countries and small countries too. So,
so were there any surprises along the way? And I ask this because I know you also just published a book called Failing in the Field, and looks at some interesting case studies of things not to do perhaps in the field.
Yeah, this is a very cathartic book for me to write. So the, it's almost trite to say this, but it's true. We got to learn from our failures, right? It's fun to talk about the successes. There's no doubt. I much prefer to go and give a public talk and talk about this program. It feels great. It's exciting. But we got to learn from failures too. Roughly speaking, it's important to think about 3 types of failures. There's idea failures, implementation failures, and research failures. Obviously, there's probably a wider category, but in my space, in my thinking, it's those 3. So an idea failure is when, well, it turns out that was a good idea, but it didn't work. So the idea was wrong. Something was off. The 2 that I'll focus on, and to answer your question, are implementation failures and research failures. So in the 6 sites, one of them didn't work. So what I just told you was all excited. I didn't go through details. We don't have charts and stuff. But if I did show you country by country, you would see that 5 of the sites looked really good and 1 not so. And we actually saw a negative effect. It wasn't statistically significant, so I'll just call it 0.
Okay.
This was in Honduras. The asset that was provided were chickens, and they got sick and died. In hindsight, I think it was a thought-through decision, but I think one thing we learned from that is we need to really make sure that the assets that are chosen to promote, because you give households choices in the way this program runs, but it's a constrained set. It's 4 choices. And if it's something new, really make sure that it's good. What are the risks and returns of that asset? Chickens can be really profitable, but also much riskier. And when a virus hits or some bug hits, and
it wipes them out.
So it was a humanitarian failure, but we actually did learn something important from it. We learned the importance of transferring that asset as the linchpin of the program. And if that asset doesn't work, the program did not work.
Right.
A research failure, and this is what the book is about, is when, no, we didn't learn something useful for the world about what to do and what not to do. We learned what not to do as a researcher. We learned that if you were going to set up a randomized trial and your code for randomization is flawed, you end up with a bad study. And sometimes that happens in a real rush, and you got to be careful. We learned that if you're doing a survey and you want to do a test within your survey by reversing the order of questions, that this can be really useful for learning. But if you screw up on the coding, you screw up and you don't get. And so we did this. We randomized the ordering of questions because we wanted to know if it mattered. And instead of randomizing the order, we actually just dropped half the questions.
Okay.
And it was just a coding error. But if we don't document these things and point out that, like, look, going to electronic coding can open up some doors, but you got to be careful.
Sure.
There's some that are much more about partner management failures, where we didn't really fully take into account all of the challenges that our partner was going to face. And so we were testing the integration of a training program along with a credit program. But the credit officers, the training thing was this thing on the side for them. Their priority is getting repayments.
Okay.
And they weren't, even though senior management said, no, we want to make the training an important part, they didn't actually compensate the employees with any sort of metrics and outcomes of actually doing the training. Instead, the compensation was all on repayment. So what ended up happening was, it didn't take long for any time any default to happen or to be at risk of default, the credit officers just stopped the training and didn't do it.
Right.
So the research just fell apart, and there was nothing to learn. There's no report at the end of the day. There's no academic paper. There's no policy report. We learned nothing other than what not to do as a research project. And so that's been, we've had some successes, but we've also had a lot of those projects,
Right.
and we need to document these and learn from them.
Sure.
So we wrote this book where we collected a bunch of our stories. And we also have been working with the World Bank Development Impact blog to post stories on there. So we're encouraging people to try to do that as well.
Are you working at all with the UN and their goals for sustainability?
IPA does have some projects. I have one project with them personally, with UNICEF, not the larger institution, in Ghana. I don't know the full slate of all the other
Right.
projects. The Sustainable Development Goals, I think,
Just because you're
yeah.
working on the poverty issue, and I know
Right.
that's a huge UN issue, so that's why I was wondering if there's any
So,
overlap there.
there's certainly a lot of overlap in interest. There's also a UN group called Better Than Cash Alliance, which is trying to promote mobile money, and we do have a lot of studies that are trying to understand more about what the impact of mobile money is, as well as how to make it work right.
You mean the microfinancing part of giving people small loans and having them?
Well, one of the things with mobile money refers to actually having effectively a bank account via your cell
Okay.
phone. And actually, developing countries some of them are much further ahead than the United States on this. So in the United States, we can use Venmo or PayPal, but we still have to fund those through a credit card or a bank account. In a developing country, particularly Kenya is like the poster child for kind of the earliest launch and expansion of this. There's agents throughout the country now where you can just walk up, give them cash, and then it basically gets deposited onto an account, and on your cell phone you can do a few clicks and see that I
okay.
have $12, and then I can send you the $12.
I see.
And you might live halfway across the country, and so it's an easy way for me to send you money.
Right.
The next phase that we're seeing is a big push to say, okay, great, now that you can easily move money around, how about saving more? Let's make it so that you can automate savings. And then the next step from that is, now that you can actually get loans much more easily and pay loans more easily, so you can lower the cost for banks for reaching people, and you can make it really simple. 3 clicks and you get access to a loan. That's actually a really exciting opportunity in terms of just lowering transaction costs. 3 clicks, you get a loan.
Right.
It's also a little scary.
Yeah.
3 clicks, you get a loan. Like, did you really know the interest rate and all the terms and how you're going to repay that? How do you actually do consumer protection and disclosure policy when it's 3 clicks and boom, you get a loan?
Right.
So
Right.
it's
Potentially.
exciting,
Yeah.
but it also makes me nervous. And so there's a lot of work that needs to happen on
Yeah.
that front. And the UN is the Better Than Cash Alliance does work on that area as we do.
Okay. So moving forward and looking at the future and the graduation program, what do you see? Are you building on that project?
Absolutely, because I feel like we we really got over a big threshold of just a kind of a proof of concept that there is this theory of a poverty trap, do a lot of things, and we can see impacts at 3 years, and we actually, from the India site, we've seen positive results at 7 years. We're going to do long-term follow-up on some of the others as well. But then there's a lot of questions that we still don't know the answer to about how to make this work better. Cost is a big issue. It is an expensive program. So when you want to take this to a country and try to work with them to roll this out as a policy for the country, take the weekly household visits. Maybe there's a way of making those monthly instead, or even taking them out. Can you still have the same effect?
Right.
I don't know, but we can test.
Right.
We can set up a study, so we're doing that in Ghana right now. One of the other lessons from the study that was important is that even though the results created these big treatment effects on average, but some people were helped a lot and other people just a little bit. So why? And so we're doing work to try to understand who is helped a lot and who is given all of these resources and then only really a little bit better off. What's going on that they're not able to seize these opportunities and run with them?
Right.
So in Ghana, we're set up a study where we are rolling out cognitive behavioral therapy to work on issues of depression and planning, and we're doing that before the program, just before the program, and then roll out the program. And maybe that will help households seize the opportunity more. And so then maybe we'll see, the households that were only being helped a little bit, maybe that'll help them seize this opportunity and have a bigger effect for them. So that's another test. We'll know in a couple of years the results. So there's lots of questions like this that are important to know, that are important both for how to run the program better, how to run it at lower cost, and so that's kind of the next wave of the agenda on these projects.
All right, we will look forward to hearing from you about that then.
Great, thanks.
Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you very much.
And sharing some of your work. For more information about Professor Karlan and his research, please visit our website at macmillan.yale.edu. Be sure to join us again for another episode of the MacMillan Report, made possible through funding from the Whitney and Betty MacMillan Center for International and Area Studies at Yale.